I'm about to introduce, great pleasure to introduce a good friend who I've gotten to know quite well over the last decade or so during his many visits to Washington. We're talking about the Right Honorable Henry McLeish, who served as the second First Minister of Scotland from 2000 to 2001. Henry is also an honorary member of our St. Andrews Society in Washington, D.C., and we're very proud of that fact. He's a former Scottish Labour politician, now an author and an academic, and a former football player, I should say. We'll touch on all of that, I'm sure. During the last 2 decades, Mr. McLeish has been a visiting professor and lecturer at a number of American universities, teaching European Union studies and UK government and politics. He was born in Fife, in a coal mining family. After retiring from football as a young man, he became a lecturer at Heriot-Watt University before entering politics. Mr. McLeish joined the Scottish Labour Party in 1970. He was a member of Parliament for Central Fife from 1987 to 2001, and a member of the Scottish Parliament for Central Fife from 1999 to 2003. He played a key role in the process of devolution, which returned key aspects of legislative power and government authority from the UK to Scotland. As former First Minister Donald Dewar's right-hand man, Westminster, he helped secure devolution for Scotland and maneuvered the Scotland Act through the Westminster Parliament. Later, as Minister for Devolution and Home Affairs at the Scottish Office from 1997 to 1999, Mr. McLeish was instrumental in shaping Scotland's first Parliament in almost 300 years. After Mr. Dewar's death, Mr. McLeish defeated his rival Jack McConnell in a race to become second First Minister of Scotland. While First Minister, he was widely recognized as being a very businesslike manager of the Scottish executive. He traveled widely, especially in the United States, where he capitalized on sentiment for Scotland among American politicians in advance of the cause of Scottish industry and export. After 30 years in elected politics, Mr. McLeish retired from public office in 2003. Since leaving mainstream politics, he has lectured widely in the United States at the U.S. Air Force Academy, the University of Oklahoma, the University of Arkansas, and most recently at St. Mary's University in San Antonio, Texas. Mr. McLeish has published about 25, authored or co-authored about 25 books. 2 that stand out in my mind, which are a bit different from the rest, which are focused on politics. The 2 that stand out and I think are of special interest to our audience were Global Scots, Voices from Afar, which he co-authored with Kenny MacAskill in 2006, and Wherever the Saltire Flies, also with Kenny MacAskill in 2006, which is about the worldwide phenomena of St. Andrews societies, many of which he's visited in his travels around the world. In line with the theme of this year's conference, Henry has written a significant piece for a new book to be published shortly, which celebrates the 700th anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath. That's actually come out. That's the book I referenced earlier, which Lord Bruce also contributed to, the Declaration of Arbroath, Conquered by No One. Henry, let's hear from you now, please.
Well, thanks very much, John, for that great introduction. I feel after an introduction like that, I should just go away because I can't compete with the qualities you've bestowed on me. That said, can I thank the Scottish North American Foundation as well for the kind invitation to speak. America is my second home. I think I've been involved now in more than 120 visits over the last 30 years. And whilst I may, like other people, have reflections on the politics of the US, you know, I'm in love with the country and its people. What I'd like to try and do, John, in the brief time that I have, is to maybe look at the Declaration of Arbroath, look at the significance for America, and then make some wider comments on some reflections, which I think are pertinent in this kind of intense pandemic period we're all living through. So if that's acceptable, let me begin. Well, obviously, we've heard of the fact that it's the 700th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath on the 6th of April, 1320. You know, we're lucky because few countries have the opportunity to look back in their history and acknowledge with a pride a date and document of such importance and of value to the world today. Initially a letter to the Pope, and later as a declaration of enduring significance for Scotland, its wars of independence, the struggle against English tyranny and aggression, the desire to be free, an independent country, and more significantly, the right to contest the divine right of kings in favour of the wishes of the people. This is a great tale. Now an important part of Scotland's history, the Declaration has assumed a significance well beyond its medieval context and the plight of an ancient nation on the edge of Europe, seeking justice, freedom, and respect. Throughout history, great speeches, ideas, battles, and events have shaped lives, influenced war and peace, and have often made an enduring impact far beyond their immediate localities and countries. The Declaration of Arbroath has also been the focus of much speculation and debate about its worth, its aims, its historical significance, and the true extent of a carefully crafted piece of political drama at a time of great turbulence and stress between Scotland and England. There have also been speculative claims about the impact it has had on events such as the Declaration of Independence in America, the French Revolution, and more recently the drive for Scottish independence. A country is always seeking to lift itself to a higher ground. Scotland is no exception. The soul of every country is a collection of convictions, dispositions, and sensibilities that shape, characterise, and inform conduct. Scotland, again, is no exception. So what do we make of the claims that turn a medieval social contract into the inspiration behind the American Declaration of Independence and the French Revolution? There is little documentary evidence to confirm either of these claims. On the other hand, does this really matter? The ideas, the emotions, the sentiment, the universal beliefs, and the pure people intent of the Declaration are timeless and embrace the essential dignity of people everywhere. Scotland's place in the world is not the outcome of one document, but a whole range of thoughts and ideas that emerged from the Enlightenment. The Declaration, the Claim of Right, and even the work of great Scots such as our national poet, Robert Burns. Is there for honest poverty? Surely it must be the Marseillaise of humanity. An auld lang syne, of course, the International Song of Friendship. And what about the words of Scots Whahay? By oppression's woes and pains, by your sons in servile chains, we would drain our dearest veins, but they shall be free. Liberty in every bow, let us do or die. These are universal and timeless and evident in any struggle, past or future. Key figures behind the American Revolution studied the Enlightenment and read widely the works of Francis Hutcheson, David Hume, Adam Smith, and indeed our national poet. Humanity and the rejection of any authority that could not be justified by reason gained traction. Scotland was impacting on the world, and Voltaire, French Enlightenment writer and philosopher, said, "We look to Scotland for all our ideas of civilization." There is an obvious truth that Scotland's philosophical contribution to the world can be firmly linked to the timeless assertion of the dignity of people. The Declaration of Arbroath is an ideal fit. The defence of freedom, opposing tyranny, positive pride and national identity, and the power of people. These are stirring sentiments and powerful ideals, and they carry a distinctive Scottish imprint, and also have become part of your great country. Long before the American Declaration of Independence, where possibly 40% of the signers were of Scottish descent, the Declaration of Arbroath more than hinted that the replacement of royal rulers was possible. This is one of the most important ideas to emerge in the history of the medieval period. The signers of the Declaration of Independence and the framers of the American Constitution could have been emboldened by, and I quote, "As long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. It is the truth, not for glory, not riches, nor honour, that we are fighting, but for freedom, for that alone which no honest man gave up, but for life itself." 460 years later, the US Declaration of Independence reflected similar sentiments. And I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This has led some to remark that the American spirit of freedom was born in Arbroath in 1320. In today's turbulent and troubled world, the Declaration of Arbroath should be viewed through the prism of President Lincoln's idea of his country being and I quote again, touched by the better angels of our nation. In his first inaugural address, Lincoln was trying to capture the importance of themes with a unifying purpose, such as freedom and liberty, the sense of a broader humanity, and the universal importance of such ideas to all the peoples of the world. Abraham Lincoln was also one of Robert Burns' greatest admirers. A close study of his speeches provides a window into his inspiring ideas, many of them originating in Scotland and of universal significance and application. So there is no doubt that the links between the Declaration of Arbroath and what has happened in the world and what happened in America are very obvious to all of us. And I think that even today, the Declaration has a ringing significance for some of the more contemporary problems that we have. I'd just briefly like to mention 4 of them. First is the idea that after 313 years, Scotland could leave the Union of the United Kingdom it joined in 1707. There is no doubt that Scotland could become an independent country. The real question is whether it should. The stirring words of Bruce and his nobles leaves us in no doubt about the emotional pull of this aspiration, and the importance of questions of identity and dignity are powerful considerations in deciding the outcomes of today's political questions. But we do live in a world during the pandemic which is screaming at us to talk about interdependence. And I like to think that the poem by John Donne, that no man is an island, does extend to countries. And it's worth thinking that the debate in Scotland is not yet over. There is much to be debated, and there is no doubt that the significance of the pandemic may let us think on a wider canvas about what is in Scotland's best interest as we move forward. My second point is to talk about Scotland and America. It is a remarkable relationship by any standard and by any stretch of the imagination. And I like to think about it like this: from trade to Highland Games in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I have attended, and many areas in between, there is a strong bond between our 2 countries. I perceive that this is going to get stronger as we move forward. Scotland is maturing. Scotland has a great future to look forward to. It's got a strengthened democracy. And I think with a confident Scotland, we could look towards more integration, more interrelationship, and more interdependence as we move forward. And of course, when we think about America, it's a large country of 320 million people. We are a small country in terms of 5 million population, but we are an ambitious country, and so is America. That's part of the tie that binds us together, and I'm sure will only get stronger as we move forward. And of course, we are strong on trade. And thank you, all Americans who love our whiskey. It is our biggest export. It is a biggest part of our trade, but our trade is very significant overall, and it's worthwhile for us to concentrate on that as we move forward into a different era for the rest of this particular century. So the deep roots we have in the US, created by immigration, and I would always like to think as we move forward that the Statue of Liberty is more than just a tourist symbol. It is America. America was built on immigration. It still is. And I think that we are proud to be part of a country that values the significance of immigration. Some people would like to question that, but I think at the end of the day, immigration has made America, and there's no reason why, ladies and gentlemen, that shouldn't continue in the future. My third point is topical because it's about democracy, both in Europe and the US, and of course, including the United Kingdom. We've talked about the Declaration of Arbroath. We've talked about the Declaration of Independence, the framing of the Constitution. These were lofty ideals, great ideals. But as we look forward, we do see challenges to what we call democracy. Whether it be politics, whether democracy itself, or governance, there is much work to be done. And it's worthwhile just refreshing our minds about a great phrase that was used in a poem written by Robert Burns called A Dream in 1786. This was written as a less than sincere contribution to George III's 48th birthday in that particular year. And Burns used the phrase, "Facts are shields that winna ding and dunna be disputed." He was quite simply saying, in a modern sense, the truth is vital. Without the truth, without facts, there can be no democracy. And indeed, our politics just now needs to be rebalanced on the question of truth. Because trust, truth, tolerance, respect, legitimacy fire every democratic institution and political party. There is no point in Europe or in the US for us to turn our back on these particular qualities. And again, at a time where we have pandemics and climate change issues, let's paraphrase Abraham Lincoln and say that a planet divided against itself will not survive. So I think many of these messages are applicable to our democracy. We want it to be strong, but there is no doubt there are major threats at the present time. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, let me finish on a subject of humanity itself. And the subject is becoming a patriot of humanity. I have always been very impressed with Victor Hugo, author of The Hunchback of Notre Dame and of course Les Miserables. But he was a philosopher, a French philosopher, writer, politician, and critic of Napoleon. He was worried about nationalism in 19th century France. And he said, "As I advance in life, I grow more simple and I become more and more patriotic for humanity." This is an important idea. We can be patriotic for Scotland, for the United States, for any country in Europe. And we can revere all the sentiment that goes into that. But isn't it a time when we look and see pandemics that know no boundaries, climate change that knows no boundaries, that we would want, also, obviously, as I would want, to be a patriot of Scotland, but I genuinely want to be a patriot of humanity, because again, that says interdependence. No man is an island. We all need to work together, because if one loses, we all loses. And so therefore, I think for every child that has been born in the world, every US child, every Scottish child, that idea of being proud of your country, a swelling pride, a passion to be a great patriot, we all accept. But let's go from this conference and let's discuss elsewhere the idea of all of us being patriots of community. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a real privilege to talk to all of you. You have a fabulous country, and I sincerely hope that the partnership with Scotland will thrive and prosper as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Henry.
Thank you, John.
Very, very good to hear from you again. Some very timely thoughts. We have time for a couple of questions, and then we're going to take another short break. One of them here that I see that I'll pass on to you, Henry, as follows from John Cherry. Dr. Patrick Griffin, history professor at Notre Dame, says that migration is an act of immigration. What did the Scots who emigrated to North America imagine, do you think?
Imagined in the sense, John, of arriving in America or leaving their own country? No, I mean, I think the reason I raised migration was that I know it's a controversial subject in the US, in Europe, in the United Kingdom. But for me, from a simple political perspective, it's all part of my yearning for one community. When I see a face of color, I don't see difference. When I see someone speaking a different language or hear a different language, I don't think difference. And what I'd like to think, John, is that there is a pressing need for what I've said about truth, trust, and tolerance. America has a remarkable history. Some of it Americans might want to forget in terms of the Civil War, in terms of slavery itself. That is an amazing stain on the United States. But of course, since then, there have been fabulous developments. But you know, at a time of strife, a time of stress, a time of turbulence, a time of intolerance, it's always easy to identify those who are vulnerable and least able to defend themselves, so that we can have a them and us. We're the them, they're the us. This is a powerful element of what we call populism and authoritarianism. And I just believe I want to disregard all of that as being inhuman. And therefore, countries obviously need policies for migration, but they do need a sentiment which goes with it, which is not to attack people for class or colour or quality of education, but to see them as one part of a wider universe. And if we do that, John, then the Statue of Liberty, like Reagan's City on the Hill, becomes a beacon for progress and goodness in the world, and not a threat to the world.
Thank you, Henry. We have a question from a couple of Canadians. As you know, I think we have a number of Canadians on the program as speakers and many attendees from Canada. So the question is really, do you have some thoughts and contributions for our Canadian attendees here?
Well, I was just going to say, John, I get that contribution every night because my wife's Canadian, and so greetings to Canada. I feel partly Canadian myself now because I've been browbeaten long enough. You know, Canada has an important boundary with the United States, and there's always the view that, like a bit like Scotland, England, there is a healthy conflict, a healthy exchange of different views. But there again, John, one of the things that I've stressed, and I'm happy to stress again, is this whole question of tolerance and difference. You know, Canada is a remarkable country. It's a federation like the United States. And we have a lot of association with Canada, of course, because of through our migration. I see Canada prospering as we go forward. It's regarded as a more liberal society, whatever that means. And of course, America has gone through recent convulsions to get to a new president. So we want to work with Canada. I'm sure America will see some of its better aspects of its country in Canada. And as far as I'm concerned, the more we work together, the more we can make progress and take things forward.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, John.
Maybe one more question, and then we're going to take a break. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, sir.
Don't see any here. Any concluding thoughts? Here's one. I'd like to thank Mr. McLeish for the work he did in setting up our parliament here in Scotland. You will have seen Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg attack the parliament this week. How should Scottish politicians deal with the current Tory government, which it did not vote for? Is independence our only option? Touch gently on that, if you would, please.
Don't worry, John. I'm an expert at being gentle with American audiences and Scots. No, look, Rees-Mogg, to put him in perspective and to be courteous about it, he's regarded in the House of Commons, they refer to him as the honourable member from the 18th century. He's a comments, in my judgment, have little relevance to the issues that we face today. I think the more sensible issue for the Union is that the debate so far, John, has been about what Scotland's doing. Scotland has often been accused of being out of step. Why does it want independence? Why does it want more powers? Why does it might want to be a federal country? The answer is quite simple. The answers don't lie in Scotland. Much of the protest is about the governance from the United Kingdom, the governance of the Union. And it seems to me, to quote a well-known political phrase in America, it's the Union stupid. The Union has to change, John. Scotland has a legitimate right to have aspiration to independence. Of course, there are other alternatives that we could look at. But the point is, Westminster cannot continue to keep saying no to another referendum. That's a denial of democracy. It can't keep saying no to the aspirations of a country that have evolved greatly over the last 20 years. What the Union needs to do, instead of attacking Scotland, is to recognise that 4 nations make up the Union of the United Kingdom. 4 nations with different aspirations, different ways forward. But what the union's got to acknowledge, the union in its current form, the status quo unionism, can't survive. And if they don't think it's important enough, John, for a new dynamic union to be created, then there is only one outcome 5-10 years ahead, and that will be that Scotland will give up its membership of the union and start to act and go forward as an independent country. I think there are alternatives, but the challenges with Westminster and the union and the two traditional parties and the government, if they cannot come up with a union that excites and enthuses Scotland, then independence may happen. And finally, John, the question is, you cannot look at the union now through the prism of 1707. This is 2020. And Scots are ambitious and anxious to move forward. So Westminster, you have the challenge. If you respond, things could be different. If you do not, then Scotland is heading for independence.
On that note, to be continued, both with Henry and others, I'm sure. I want to thank you very, very much, Henry, for joining us today.